Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I wish you all a pleasant listening experience. Today, I'm here to interpret The End of Your Life Book Club for you. I will delve into the essence of this book. When our loved ones are nearing the end of their lives, reading can be a wonderful way to accompany them through their final moments. Life is short, and aging and death are inevitable for each one of us. The people we hold dear will eventually leave us. Have you ever thought about what you can do to accompany them when they are facing the end of life, knowing that death is imminent, and they cannot change it? What can you do to make the most of your time, free from guilt, and allow them to depart peacefully? In reality, while we may be deeply saddened by the impending departure of our loved ones, many people struggle to provide high-quality end-of-life companionship, and instead, they weep and mourn, causing distress. What departing individuals least want to see are scenes like these. So, how can you accompany them through their final moments? After listening to the interpretation of this book today, you might find the answers you seek. In the book's preface, Yu Qiuyu wrote that this book reveals a significant secret about humanity. The best choice for a person in the twilight of their life is to revisit their favorite books with their family. This scene is like standing at the top of a hill, looking down at the circular mountains you've climbed in your life, filled with a refreshing and brilliant poetic atmosphere. The End of Your Life Book Club tells the story of the author's final moments with his mother after learning of her late-stage cancer diagnosis. At first, the author didn't know how to naturally interact with his mother as she approached her end. It was only when they talked about the books his mother loved that their communication became natural. His mother was no longer a patient but a friend who loved to read. The reading they shared was the best way for them to part. This book is as famous in the United States as Tuesdays with Morrie, and has been translated into more than 30 languages, spreading its influence worldwide. The author of this book is Will Schwalbe, who was originally a senior vice president and editor-in-chief at a world-renowned publishing company and has played a role in creating many well-known books. With his mother's encouragement, he resigned and started his own cooking website, which he loved. His mother had a significant impact on his life, and the inspiration for writing this book came from their final reading club. He promised to turn these stories into a book, and he fulfilled that promise. I should also mention that he is a homosexual but has always been brave in being himself. He has a loving partner and has found fulfillment in life. So, now that I've introduced the basics of this book and the author's background, let me provide you with a detailed account of the book's content. The first key point is the comforting power that reading in the final moments of life can provide, a power that we all desperately need. The second key point is that even if life has only one day left, we should strive to make the most of the present. The third key point is that sharing and accepting are the best ways to accompany our loved ones as they depart. That we've just discussed the main focus of the entire book, and now, let's delve into the first key point. In the final moments of life, the comforting power of reading is something we desperately need. Life is full of unexpected events, and sometimes, a single event can disrupt the tranquility of our routine existence. What was once a structured and orderly life can quickly descend into chaos and panic due to the occurrence of this event. In such moments, the most crucial thing is to actively adjust our mindset, regain hope, and restore confidence. Regardless of the circumstances, life must go on, and our loved ones continue to support us as they always have. There are numerous ways to adjust one's mindset, and in the book we're discussing today, the common thread is reading. Reading provided the author's mother, who had just been diagnosed with cancer, with the reassuring strength she needed. Here, reading is not seen as a luxury but an integral part of daily life, a pathway to find solace within books. Before the diagnosis of her mother's cancer, the author's entire family led extremely busy lives. Everyone was preoccupied with their own responsibilities, work, social life, fitness, and more. All family members had a fear of idleness, as any moment of idleness seemed unsettling. Even the author's father, who was already of an advanced age, only found brief moments of respite after undergoing injections in the hospital. The mother, who was the central coordinator of the family, was especially busy. She not only managed the family's daily affairs but also organized the lives of several hundred people in a large charity organization. She maintained contact with various people she had crossed paths with and provided assistance. Additionally, she established a library foundation in Afghanistan, which consumed the majority of her time. Her work required her to frequently travel to conflict-ridden countries. Due to the rigors of her journeys, issues related to climate and diet, she would often fall ill upon returning home. Nevertheless, her illnesses would typically resolve after a short stay in her home country. In the spring of 2007, after returning from Afghanistan, where she had been participating in a book exhibition, she fell ill again. However, we did not take it seriously at the time. It wasn't until the summer of 2007, while her plans for the future were still intact, that the doctor's report confirming her cancer diagnosis arrived. The news came unexpectedly, and I, who was abroad attending the book exhibition, nearly fainted upon hearing it. Surprisingly, my mother remained calm. Over the phone, she told me that she was a fighter and would battle cancer to the end. What empowered her in her resilience was the strength she drew from the books she had read throughout her life. Whenever my mother felt sad, confused, or lost, books offered her solace. Books allowed her to concentrate her mind, find peace, and navigate through confusion. Undoubtedly, reading was as ordinary to her as eating and sleeping. As a book editor myself, I also had the habit of reading regularly. However, it was only after my mother fell ill that we truly began reading together. The first book we read together after her illness was The Wild Detective by Polin Yan, and Thomas's The Man in Decline. This experience made me realize that my mother and I, though on different life paths, could still share the experience of reading. It also led me to discover a new way to accompany my mother during her final days. Reading together injected new energy into our lives, and we no longer felt the need to withdraw or face isolation. I also started helping my mother write a blog, making it easier for everyone who cared about her to stay updated on her condition. Our home received numerous gifts, and I accompanied my mother to chemotherapy appointments regularly, marking the beginning of her formal battle against cancer. During our book club sessions, I read a book recommended by my mother, The Etiquette of Illness. This book made me realize that there is indeed an etiquette to illness, and it greatly aided in our interactions during her illness. I wrote down some of the key points mentioned in the book on a small card, which served as a constant reminder. This decision ensured that I would be the one who understood my mother the most and that I would accompany her comfortably to the end. This final companionship provided us with the opportunity to revisit our family and everything in our lives, deepening our understanding of each other. What's even more intriguing is that these conversations always revolved around our book club. During each book club meeting, we discussed my mother's youth, her student days, and the books she loved at each stage of her life. My mother also shared stories about her college years, including a passionate love affair with a professor and her subsequent marriage to my father and the birth of her children. Because of books, we opened the box of memories, and when we touched upon private matters we didn't want to discuss, we would always return to the world of books. In these book club meetings, wonderful memories from the past slowly resurfaced. During the final moments of life, there's nothing more precious than reminiscing about the good times with your dearest people. My mother's cancer had already progressed to the 4th stage, making surgical treatment impossible. Chemotherapy was the only option. The side effects of the treatment caused her pain and discomfort, accompanied by issues such as diarrhea, constipation, and unrelenting fatigue. At critical times, books always provided us with strength, and we began to read books related to prayer. Daily Strength is a book written for believers, containing verses with religious significance. My mother carried this book with her throughout her battle with cancer, and it brought her immense comfort. While my mother was religious, I was not. She had encouraged me multiple times to embrace religion, but I never made it a part of my life. However, as we progressed through books with a focus on Christian faith during our book club sessions, and due to several thoughtful discussions with my mother, I decided to pray for her. Whether there was anyone listening to my prayers or not, it was the most heartfelt wish I could offer her. So, to sum up, in the past few minutes, we've covered the first key point of this book. In the final moments of life, the comforting power of reading is something we desperately need. This section mainly discussed how my stable life was disrupted when my mother was suddenly diagnosed with cancer, plunging our family into deep anxiety. My mother and I combated this anxiety through our book club, gradually finding inner peace in the midst of our shared conversations. Next, let's discuss the second key point. Even if there's only one day left in life, we should strive to make the most of the present moment. When a person is diagnosed with a terminal illness and knows that their time is limited, they often experience symptoms of panic, fear, and helplessness in the face of impending death. In reality, many people diagnosed with terminal illnesses tend to do just one thing: lie in bed and wait for death. However, the mother in this book not only briefly defeated cancer and extended her life, but she also accomplished remarkable feats during the final moments of her life. 2 months after her cancer diagnosis, the first scan after chemotherapy was a highly anticipated moment. Everyone was anxiously waiting, uncertain about how much time she had left. It's terrifying for a person to suddenly have no future to look forward to. The mother couldn't see her own future, and we were even more afraid of a future without her. The results of the scan, however, brought great relief. Her tumor had shrunk and was still shrinking. This meant that she had more time to make plans for herself, and we had more time to spend together. Our book club continued, and we discussed her New Year's resolution, which was to establish a library in Afghanistan. Another resolution was about me, hoping that I would willingly leave my incessantly complaining job. She showed me several photos she had received from people she had assisted, all showcasing their new lives. My mother took great pride in these photos, and it was in that moment that I decided to leave the job I didn't like and pursue something I could be proud of. Initially, my mother was an ordinary high school principal, but her life took a remarkable turn when she received a letter from a Filipino nun. This nun was not only a sister of charity but also an incredible fundraiser. She told my mother about the conditions in refugee camps and initiated a fundraising campaign. She invited my mother to come and help in the refugee camps. When the opportunity arose, my mother decided to leave the school for a semester and work in the refugee camps. Even my sister Nina, with whom she was having minor disagreements at the time, agreed to accompany her. In those camps, they witnessed the harshest living conditions and the most destitute people in the world. During their time there, they both found new life purposes. 1 year later, my mother resigned from her position at the school to contribute to the refugee aid cause. Her story always served as an inspiration for us. It was only after I realized the fragility and impermanence of life that I bravely took the first steps towards embracing a new life. My mother had long seen the essence of life. Life is uncontrollable, and the only thing we can control is living in the present. Even as my mother approached the end of her life, and our collective dreams were shattered, she remained committed to her work, travel, family gatherings, and more. Her illness may have affected her physically, but it didn't diminish her love for life. As soon as the tumor started shrinking, her top priority was to travel to London. London held a special place in her heart and had profound meaning for her. Though this trip was particularly taxing, my mother developed a high fever as soon as she arrived in London, and her condition persisted in the hospital. Yet, it didn't prevent her from seeing old friends, working, and indulging in nostalgia. Subsequently, she spent 2 months in Florida, where she loved the weather, beaches, houses, and libraries. She made plans for reading and meeting friends during this time. Her spirits were good, although it was clear she had lost a lot of weight, and her hair had thinned considerably. In reality, my mother was inching closer to death, but even so, she would always say she was lucky. During this time, we were reading a book titled The Cost of Salt. The book's protagonist had initially been very pessimistic, but a kind greeting from a stranger rekindled hope in life. In real life, my mother was always exceptionally gentle to others. She would express gratitude to everyone she met, even during chemotherapy at the hospital. Since childhood, she taught the 3 of us children to appreciate every act of kindness. This quality, in part, allowed her to persist and confront cancer with grace, even in the face of a life-threatening condition. This was all about making the most of every minute, even when life was nearing its end. So, to summarize, in the past few minutes, we discussed the book's second key point. Even if there's only 1 day left in life, we should strive to make the most of the present moment. This section primarily focused on how my mother, despite knowing her time was limited, optimistically made life plans, including traveling, meeting old friends, spending time with family, staying informed about national events, and continuing to focus on unfinished ventures. Although her health often made her feel uncomfortable, her lifetime of dedication allowed her to accomplish the things she wanted to do. Her gratitude extended her life to a certain extent. These are the first 2 key points of the book. The first emphasizes self-improvement, highlighting the comforting power of reading in life's final moments, and the second underscores the importance of making the most of the present moment, even when there's only 1 day left in life. Now let's move on to the third key point of this book. Sharing and accepting is the best way to accompany our loved ones in their final journey. In the Year of Auspiciousness is a book that delves into themes of death, sadness, and illness. In this book, the author describes the feelings of profound grief, loneliness, and regret that overcame him after the passing of his parents. He regrets not expressing certain words, not sharing his feelings, and not finding ways to express his gratitude. He reflects on the suffering, helplessness, and physical shame his parents endured during their final days. These emotions are something many people who have experienced the loss of loved ones can relate to. So, how can one avoid these regrets? Sharing and accepting are the best ways. It involves speaking your heart, doing what you wish to do, asking questions, listening more, and being present. This is what brings peace and courage to our loved ones in their final journey. In comparison, I was fortunate. I understood this lesson during the book club with my mother and continued to spend time with her right until her last moments, following this approach. At the same time, my mother continued to lead me through entirely new experiences. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer a year and a half ago, she celebrated her 75th birthday. Her health had deteriorated significantly by then, with new treatment drugs showing no effect. Her tumors continued to grow, spreading rapidly. However, she was determined not to show it. She continued going to meetings, meeting people, attending concerts, and ballet performances. From her, I witnessed the strength of the first-generation professional women in the passionate era, who actively engaged in discussions, gatherings, and reading to pursue a new life. Some of these pioneers made everything possible, and my mother was among the exceptional ones. I gladly used reading to initiate discussions and guide my mother through such topics. In addition to this, we often discussed issues related to refugees because this was something my mother had been passionately involved in for a long time, even as her life was drawing to a close. My mother was fortunate to witness the 20th anniversary celebration of the Women's Refugee Commission. At that time, she had been undergoing chemotherapy for a year and a half, and her health was extremely fragile. However, that day, she was in good spirits, and a group of people gathered around her, acknowledging her contributions. During this period, my mother and I read The Taste of Mangoes together. The author of this book had once been a refugee and had lost both her hands. In her book, she described her experiences and how she learned to forgive. In these conversations, I felt the deep concern my mother held for refugees. It was a belief that came from a person who was not yet elderly and had nothing to do with other factors. Unfortunately, the situation was taking a turn for the worse. Her tumors were still growing within her, and the new experimental treatments were of no use to her. She decided to forego treatment, marking the beginning of a countdown for her life, a period during which all we could do was make her as comfortable as possible and spare her from further suffering. It was comforting to know that during this time, a board member of the Afghan Library Project, whom my mother had always cared for and prayed for, had successfully escaped after being kidnapped for 7 months. This eased one of my mother's concerns. In her view, this person needed to stay alive because only when those working in dangerous zones for refugees are alive can there be hope in our world. My mother's condition deteriorated rapidly, and day by day, she grew weaker. Nonetheless, our book club continued. During this time, we read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. While it's a suspense novel, it made me understand the work my father and the Women's Refugee Commission had done over the years. This revelation inspired me, showing how reading could spread and carry forward a positive spirit. Hence, I decided to write a book for my mother because our book club was essentially a life reading club. Of course, the most significant reason was my love for my mother, and my immense pride in her. The final book club session allowed my mother and me to discuss the topic of homosexuality for the first time. When I was 20, I came out to my parents through a letter. In her reply, my mother admitted that her initial reaction was one of anger and unease. The main reason was that in a society rife with discrimination, being homosexual meant that my life would be significantly more challenging than that of others. However, when my mother revisited the topic in her later years, I realized how fortunate I was to have a mother who was so accepting and loving. Before my mother became completely bedridden, we returned to the hospital for one final checkup. This visit was unique, as her primary doctor gave her a farewell embrace. I watched all this unfold, filled with sorrow but helpless. My father was standing by, equally lost that I end the final moments of my mother's life. The most heart-wrenching experience fell upon my father. He is a tall and somewhat gruff man, but when he was in the house, he would tiptoe around, afraid of disturbing my mother's rest. He is already 82 years old, yet he commutes daily between the office and home, all to steal a few more glances at my mother. They have been lifelong companions, with my father always doing his utmost to protect my mother, providing genuine care and dedication. Despite their differing personalities, they shared nearly identical likes and often enjoyed each other's company, seeking to bring joy to one another when they were together and yearning for each other when apart. The last book my mother recommended I read was Freedom Recalled, which tells the story of a woman who loves to read and is nearing death due to cancer. Not long after, my mother left us. Her bedroom, the place of her departure, was filled with all the books she had read throughout her life. There was a diverse assortment of books, which had been her mentors and guides throughout her life. What comforts me is that, during the last few hours I spent with her, we talked about the books we had read together, the characters we had liked, and various passages. I also made sure to tell her that I love her. Although she eventually departed, she did so peacefully and without regret. The third key point of this book is about sharing and accepting as the best way to accompany our loved ones in their final moments. In this section, we discussed how my mother's illness was irreversible, and her life was nearing its end. I chose to be with her using the approach of sharing and accepting, guiding her to share her thoughts with me. Through these conversations, I came to know my mother better and accompanied her through her final moments. In summary, today's discussion covered 3 key points. Firstly, we talked about the comforting power of reading in the final moments of life. Even when diagnosed with cancer, my mother did not despair. Instead, she found solace in reading and used it to bid farewell to life. Secondly, we discussed the importance of making the most of the present, even when life is down to its last day. Life is unpredictable, and death can happen suddenly. What we can control is making the most of the present. My mother, even in the late stages of cancer, knew her time was limited and lived in the moment. Finally, we discussed sharing and accepting as the best way to accompany loved ones in their final moments. When facing the departure of our loved ones, even if it's incredibly painful, we should strive to keep our emotions in check and provide them with a period of happiness. Throughout the book club, I asked my mother questions and engaged in discussions to deepen our mutual understanding, allowing her to leave this world without regrets. That concludes the summary of today's content. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.